When I was young, we had these crazy ideas. We imagined that one day we'd be able to stop rushing around and let all our work be done for us by robots.
We may not yet have robots, but these days our homes are chock-a-block with willing helpers that seem to get more useful all the time.
That's what this programme is all about. The mechanics of domestic life. Those willing servants around the home that help make life easy.
As a designer, I love to see how these servants have developed. Sometimes they've taken revolutionary leaps, at other times simple refinements have come up with the goods. But they've all helped free us from the worst excesses of drudgery.
I often talk on television about domestic problems, and here's another problem, Black Monday. Every housewife knows what that means.
Well, give it some effort like that. It's work. I have a vague recollection of my mother's drudge-ridden working week has just been all graft, really, and it seemed to be full of washing and dampness and lots of tasks. And as a little child, I seemed to think that how did she manage to cope with that week?
It was incredibly hard work. Monday began the week, washing day, and it did take you all day to do the washing. You had to be really tough in those days. People did work physically a lot harder. We didn't have any of the labour-saving devices that we have these days.
One of the earliest pieces of wash day technology was this, the washboard. Simple piece of technology which mimics scrubbing your clothes on the old rocks in the old river. It's not a complicated piece of technology, but it was a huge leap forward because we could actually do our washing inside with hot water. Big advantage.
And wash day was stood on its head by the dolly or posting. For the first time we moved the stick, not the washing.
You would plunge that up and down. Often two people would work at the same time, which they call double possing.
Oh.
One up, one down. And this was the early form, really, of what became mechanised and developed into the washing machine as we know it.
Don't let all the steel and bright colours fool you. Even though it's driven by electricity, this 1930s model is still just a stick twisting in the water. In the affluent 50s, they may have dressed up the machines to give us our first sleek white goods, but the only technical advance was that they heated their own water. The 60s saw the supremacy of the twin tub, but even with an early timer, it still needed watching, tending, looking after.
Still a bit manual, we've still got this manual process, but this was the must-have product of the 60s. Hey, and away we go. Oh, it's evocative, it's all coming flooding back, I can feel it now.
But the replacement for the twin tub would wash away all competition, the front-loading automatic.
Front loaders were a revolution. Up to the 60s, we did our washing in a bucket really. The washing went round and round and round in a vertical tub. But in the 60s, with our fitted kitchen lifestyles, we turned that bucket sideways so that it would fit into our fitted kitchens. Now, how does that work? How do we keep that water in there? With a front loader, we bung our washing into the drum like that and whack it inside, and we've got an incredible rubber seal that holds the washing and all that water inside. And we've got this fantastic, nice, lifestyle, smooth white exterior, but inside we've got this whacking great drum with the washing inside it that permanently wants to get down. Gravity being what it is, the washing wants to push that drum down all the time as it spins round. So we've got two whacking great weights, top and bottom, to stabilise the whole thing, so the whole thing doesn't go vibrating off. But I can show you in a much better way, really. let's have a proper look inside. Now here's our drum with all the washing in it, and here's down there is a little motor, and that little motor will get hold of the drum and shake it all about with your washing inside if it wasn't for these big concrete lumps here, which are counterbalances to stop the whole thing vibrating away. Oops, I've almost forgot my washing. Perfect. The greatest advance in washing machines is that they're automatic. We can actually set them to do the job and walk away. And this was originally controlled by a mechanical process, almost like clockwork here. It's a little device that we set it with a real positive motion here, and it sets all these little contacts, and off it goes. Today, this is all done by a series of microchips. It's a microprocessor. And this tickles me as a designer, is that we need a remnant of an old technology to make us feel right. The control operates the timer, but the click itself does nothing. It just makes it feel like we're in control. We know what we're doing.
Modern detergents, of course, and efficient washing machines have made washing much easier. But that still leaves us with the problem of how to get the clothes dry for ironing quickly and easily.
In the 19th century, the best way to get your clothes dry was the mangle, squeezing the water out. Buttons were always a casualty, but the arrival of electricity made mangles lethal. Trapped fingers became so common that hospitals ran special mangle clinics across the land. People began to experiment with other ways of getting your clothes dry. And as you can see, we've spared no expense on this dramatic reconstruction. Well,
what I have here is a working model of one of the very earliest forms of tumble dryer. You put your clothes in here thus, hopefully they stay in there, and then we rotate, or they were rotated, over a burning fire.
the electric tumble dryer was invented in America in 1938. But like so many things, we got it much later. And it wasn't available in this country till 1958.
Rudimentary though this may look, perhaps a little bit too simple, it's exactly the same principle as a tumble dryer. All we really need to do is rotate the clothing so that hot air can get in amongst the fibres and dry it out, and all the hot air and damp air can actually pass through the framework and away. Now if you'd like your clothes singed and smelling of smoke, that was obviously okay. But I think you'll probably agree that the current electric versions are much more efficient and nicer to use. And let's see if that's dry. Marvellous. There we are. I think you'll agree there's just one or two snags to iron out.
We've been ironing in this country since the Vikings introduced smoothing stones.
Love is a burning thing.
But the iron as we know it today arrived in the 16th century, and its shape hasn't changed since. All that has is how it gets hot.
You have a whole range of these flat irons on the fire getting warm as this one's cooling down.
Judging the heat of irons like this was a skill acquired through painful trial and error.
So you have to remember that people were much more used to handling hot things. Coal or wood were the basic forms of heating in the household, and so people were much more skilled and very much more wary of the heat.
I fell into a burning ring of fire.
A variation was the ingot iron, which took the fire to the iron by inserting a slug of hot metal into the body of the iron itself.
The ring of fire.
But my favourite of these old designs is this one with burning coals inside, and I'll show you why.
Eventually this is going to go cold, so we don't go and get another ingot or some more coals. We actually pop in the bellows. Now this pushes the air through the coals, gets them nice and glowing red hot, and keeps that heat going. In actual fact, there's a little chimney there, so the air would pass right through the iron.
It's like carrying your own fireplace around, but the smoke was pretty smelly. Electric irons were a clean alternative. Invented in 1880, they became widely available after the First World War.
Surprisingly, at first, housewives were wary of electric irons. Think of it, all that power and heat in your hand seemed dangerous. But they were so much cleaner and more convenient than anything that had gone before that they became incredibly popular. So by the start of the Second World War, they reckoned that 4 out of 5 homes with electricity had an electric iron.
They were a breakthrough product and hold the title of first popular electric appliance.
Housework was getting easier by the decade. People thought electric irons were dangerous, but what about these? I've got electricity and water side by side in one hand.
But this was the ultimate design. They got the shape of the iron right from the start. Now with heat and water combined, steam irons became one of those perfect products that it's hard to fault. Phew, time for a quick cuppa. You didn't think it'd be that easy, did you?
100 years ago, how long would it take to boil a kettle? With this? Well, let's have a look. First we need some heat, and the heat here is a fire, and we've got to get this fire going. And to do that, we've got to get this bellows going, we've got to get some air through it, we've got to get a nice blaze going. Now this is a daily task performed by the lady of the house, who would have to run the house, clean the house, all with the hot water generated in this kettle. Now this is work. I'm worked out already, and we haven't even started to scrub floors and scrub shirts. I can just see those little old Victorian ladies coming round in the morning for the cappuccinos with biceps about a foot wide. This should be an Olympic event. Look out, Steve Redgrave, mate. This does give you the strength. Well, I think it's perhaps getting a little bit too hot. Well, where's the off button? Where's the off button? No switch, no button. Because there's no instant cut-off. It's all got to be worked at. Just too hot for me. Whoa, this is heavy. And it's heavy because it's cast iron. It's not plastic, it's not aluminium, it's cast iron. And it's heavy before we even get any water in it. So let's get some water in it. Let's get the old pump going. And this is an old tub. It's not a tap, it's not a main, nothing like that. This is a rain tub. But of course, in the old days, this would be from a trough or from a well or something like that. And again, it involves work. Oh, dear me. Just think people are going to bath in this and drink it. Oh, let's get it done. Right there. Now, how long will this take to boil? It's essentially a big cylinder with a big flat bottom to catch all the heat, very efficient. Boil, 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 and all the water pops out as steam. Hopefully you've got some left to actually make your brew and do your washing and all that afterwards.
But it took at least half an hour for the kettle to boil.
Now, when electricity came along, kettles stayed essentially the same shape. It's a dome shape for all the water with a flat bottom to catch the heat, except that there's no fire anymore. We've got a huge flat bottom with a huge element in there that takes a lot of heating, and there's no real design solution here. There's no real need for it to be this shape. It took 40 years of using plastics for designers to realise that we can make a kettle whatever shape we wanted. And here we've got a nice slim cylinder shape with a tiny element at the bottom, which means we can heat this much water, this much, or indeed the whole thing. It really is a good design solution. Clocks give us automation. And if you stick a kettle and a clock together, you get a nice automated servant replacement, which is this British Teasmade. And it had to be British, didn't it, really? At a certain time, the time you set, the water is siphoned from this traditional kettle into the teapot here. And as the weight is reduced on the machine, it tilts the whole Heath Robinson contraption forwards and sets the alarm off and wakes you up. Light comes on and bing, nice cup of tea.
The Teasmade was invented in the 30s. By the 50s, its appearance had become sleek and purpose-built. But to me, there's something wonderfully appealing about the older model. It wears its heart on its spout.
Looks like the old model is winning the race so far. Way, and there we go. So we better turn that off. That's great. And if you're not too alarmed, I bet you could really enjoy a nice cup of tea first thing in the morning.
Actually, I'm a coffee man myself.
Welcome to the 21st century. We don't really need the kettle anymore. As a designer, I reckon this is the most efficient way, and best way perhaps, of making a great brew. Hey, but that's my personal opinion.
Sometimes revolutionary design just sneaks up on you. Remote controls are nothing new. But when they govern everything from lighting to heating, entertainment and cooking, we're talking about a revolution in the home.
These days, our total environment can be controlled by a touch of our fingertip. And in an ultra-modern, fantastic apartment like this, those fingertip controls can be on your mobile phone. But I remember when phones were phones for speaking to people. Let's speak to someone.
The earliest phones were a completely different design from today, with their own way of making a call.
A bit like this 1880s model here, which is this shape because the dial mechanism, the clockwork, hadn't been invented, the exchanges hadn't been invented. And we simply got in touch with the operator, a human being, a person, by pressing this button here.
Hello, this is Bristol.
Because the exchange in those days was operated by people. But this left them vulnerable to skullduggery.
Go ahead, caller.
In the 1890s, Almond Strowger, an undertaker in Kansas, found work getting scarce. His rival across town, however, was doing fine, and his wife worked at the telephone exchange. Strowger suspected she was referring all calls to her husband's business. Mr. Strowger set to work to even the score, and the automatic telephone exchange was born. They still bear his name to this day.
We simply must get to the bottom of this telephone business. Calling is a better word. Since exchange is no robbery, let's have a peep at the amazing apparatus behind the scenes, and so get an idea of what happens when we dial.
You put your finger in, once you let go, the actual equipment starts to step. So that takes us our first digit.
I noticed that went back at a fairly regular speed, and when I was a kid, I always remember trying to push it back a bit faster.
Absolutely.
You can't do that.
You can do it, but if you force the dial back, you then have the capacity for getting wrong numbers because the mechanical switch can't work at faster speeds.
This is the phone we all know and love. And I remember when we used to have to rent these from the old GPO. And not only that, if you wanted a colour other than black, you used to have to pay extra. But it's really very, very old technology. And if you take the top off and look inside, we can see that the gubbins that actually makes the connection is simply clockwork.
The telephone is a design classic. This shape first appeared as long ago as the 20s and lasted until the 80s. With a cast iron monopoly, the post office just didn't need to think about changing it. But designers, on the other hand, never let things lie. The 60s trim phone and the Ericaphone reminded us that change is always just around the corner. It arrived in the shape of the mobile, though in the 80s that shape was frankly a handful.
Hello? Hello? I'm taking this call on the brick, and it's called the brick because it's really heavy.
In fact, it weighed 7 kilos. That's more than 50 mobiles weigh today.
And it's hard to believe that this was the height of mobile technology, right up until the early 1990s.
But it was a revolution waiting to happen. By 1999, one mobile was being sold every 4 seconds. Machines have taken the strain out of every aspect of life. So it was inevitable that gardening would get the mechanised treatment. In 1830, Edwin Budding was working in a mill, watching a machine cut the nap off cotton.
Which was the inspiration for this, the lawnmower, which cuts grass in exactly the same way as the machine cut nap off cotton in the mill.
The lawnmower was a revolutionary leap by Budding, especially when you consider what came before it.
Before the lawnmower, this is how they used to cut the grass, with scythes. And you had to be fully grown to use the scythe because these things were a precision tool. It had to fit exactly your height and stance. And people used to adjust things by putting little wedges under the shoes so that they would be the right height for the particular tool they were using. It's ingenious and simple.
Lawns had always been a status symbol for the landed gentry, who would have to employ armies of men with scythes to keep the grass in order.
Now we've got a bigger mower here, and obviously it takes a bit more manoeuvring, so we need a bit of motive power. And we've got our own motive power with our very own horsepower. It's the same principle, but I'm doing half as much work. There's a tiny disadvantage with our horsepower in that the horse tends to leave horseshoe-shaped indentations in our freshly mown lawn. So an ingenious method was invented to spread the load of the horse across the grass. And that's those little booties here. Let's see if they work. Come on, Dan. Come on. Up, up. And they just pop on like a little slipper. There we are. Fabulous fit, sir. Marvellous.
Horse-drawn was soon replaced by horsepower as the lawnmower evolved. But the design of these machines was still basically the same as Budding's lawnmower 150 years before. It was a revolutionary moment. Watching the first hovercraft in the early 60s, Swedish inventor Carl Dahlman became obsessed with the idea of making a lawnmower without wheels. But invention is never easy, and perhaps the best way to show you that is for me to have a go at replicating his original prototype, which used a two-stroke engine and a dustbin lid.
This is an outboard motor from a boat, but it's the same vintage, it's 1960, something like that. What we've got to do is get rid of the nautical bit, take the engine here, right off the bottom part, and make our own prototype fly mower.
The first thing I've got to do is to get at the engine.
Oh, it's moving. It's moving. Somebody's moved. Let's just turn this round and have a look at it. So somehow we've got to put on here a fan or cutting blades to simulate the action of a fly mower. Now this is where the invention begins. This is the standard engine, but what we need to do is make a base plate to fix this to our prototype.
I've got the latest technology to help me. Carl Dahlman spent months refining his ideas.
Let's see if that fits. Now what we've done here, rather than use a dustbin lid as the original inventor used, we've taken an oil drum and cut the bottom off and turned it into what we hope is the original air cushion shape. Now hopefully all these holes will be in the right place, but there's one surefire way to find out, is to just pop a couple of bolts through. We just add our garnish of metal plate to hold the fan in place. Hopefully it's quite a tight fit, and just top off with these little delicate nuts. Right, well let's see if it looks something like a fly mower and not just an oil drum with an old engine on top. Well, I think that, well, it looks the business. All we have to do is test it and see if it actually works.
I've used a car fan instead of cutting blades for safety, but I'm still not taking any chances.
Now this beast we have here is caged so we can test it safely under the proper laboratory conditions here at Bolton Institute. No guarantees, but let's see if it starts.
Well, no one said invention was easy.
Give it a shake. I don't know if it's doing anything, it just makes me feel better. Hey, we have liftoff! Yes, power. Well, it's a bit intermittent, but it is a prototype. And I can see from the fumes that it is lifting a little bit, and we have got some movement, but not much. Mostly vibrating.
It's a great feeling seeing it running, but I tell you what, I'm not doing this every week.
Look at all this smoke. Who could mow lawn with all this smoke?
Nonetheless, Dahlman's idea was picked up for manufacture immediately.
This is the production model. The motor's in the middle here, pulling the air down and creating the air cushion just like the hovercraft. And underneath, the same motor turns around the rotary cutting blades, so you've got a rotary action. It really is a nice, simple, efficient piece of design.
The Flymo became orange in the 70s after market research found it to be the most appealing colour.
These days, the Flymo concept is just so familiar, but the original 60s model was so radical that people had to demonstrate this door to door before people could realise how easy this is. I mean, it's just so easy, it's like hoovering my carpet, really.
But the pinnacle of design for those who want to take a load off these days is lurking in your garage.
When it comes to modern state-of-the-art status symbols, it doesn't come much better than this.
Next week, from the cave to the microwave, in Making a Meal of It.
Crazy about it, shine as me.